Guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host, and you can follow me on Twitter at @itchjessinho. So I'm back. I took a couple of days off because Arsenal, they're on international break, so I took a little break as well just so I could get back, to normalcy just a little bit and just kind of refresh after the long transfer window. Not gonna lie, broke down a little bit like an old car, just kind of sputtered off to the shoulder and just kind of said, you know what, I can't do it anymore. And so I needed just a couple of days to just relax, kind of just get my mind off of this stuff. Honestly, I was still on Twitter just raging, but in the end of the day, I just needed just a small break to just try to get myself back into it. So obviously I'm a little bit late on this whole Edu reaction interview thing. Everybody else has already done theirs and I'm late to the party, but I'm here to just, do it anyway. I figured you guys would be interested in hearing what I had to say anyway, so you guys can let me know in the chat box if I'm off base there, but we're going to go through the interview just a little bit. I pulled out some key points here, and I have to say I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling Edu. I'm not feeling his words, his facial expressions, foundation, solutions, all this. I'm not feeling it, but we are going to be fair here, and we're going to go through it, and I'm going to kind of talk about what I liked, what I think about it, and what I think is complete and utter bull. So we're going to go through all of that. So make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, share, all those great and wonderful things. We'll be back tomorrow as well to do Tomiyasu Tuesday. So for members, I was supposed to do a breakdown, and because I broke down, I was unable to do it. So it'll be this Tuesday, meaning tomorrow, where we'll talk all about Tomiyasu, and we'll just roll on with regular scheduling for match preview. That'll come out on Thursday. And then we'll do instant reaction and all of that on game day against Norwich. So, yep, let's get started. So you guys can let me know in the chat box what you kind of thought about the interviews. I know you probably saw both of them. One of them was Arsenal, and then the other one was for Sky. And the one for Arsenal, I mean, obviously was just a little bit more fluffy. And then the one for Sky, they kind of they dove a little bit deeper into what the fans really thought and all of that. And you could see that for me, it looked like Edu was just visibly stressed, and some of his facial expressions had me dying. But oops, sorry, you guys. And so let's go ahead. So one of the first things that Edu talked about was to build a foundation, we need time. And the interviewer basically came back at him and said, you don't have time in football. And we all know that, right? The Premier League is one of the most fast-paced and fastest-growing leagues in the world, if not the most, and so it's very difficult to build for the future and for the present at the same time in a league that's so competitive. And I think we've seen Arsenal kind of struggle with that. They tried to do both last summer, in my opinion, by bringing in Willian, re-signing Aubameyang, bringing in Thomas Partey from Atletico, and then buying Gabriel, who for me was a little bit of a raw product. He wasn't, just step right in and it works out. And when you put him next to David Luiz, you could see the thought process in bringing Gabriel in. When he was next to Rob Holding or somebody else, you could see that he is a raw product and needs a little bit of development still. Nevertheless, we looked at that window and probably, because of pandemic and all of that, thought, okay, not a bad window. I think we can all kind of say that maybe we needed an attacking midfielder. But unfortunately, Willian was terrible, Aubameyang was out of form, and Thomas was unavailable through injury. So the whole buying players, re-signing players, bringing in players for the now didn't really work out in our favor, because the most consistent and the most ever-present player that we had from that window happened to be Gabriel. And he was inconsistent just based on the fact that he's a younger player playing in his first year of the Premier League. So, building that foundation and trying to build for the present and the future didn't really work out for us. I think some of it was unlucky. I don't think anybody really thought somebody with such a spotless injury record like Thomas Partey would come in and have injuries pretty much the entire season, and nobody counted on Aubameyang falling out of form the way that he did. And I do believe that if our two world-class, if not on the cusp of world-class players in Thomas Partey and Aubameyang had had different seasons, we may have had different results. Now, in my view, we need to change the direction, now because of what happened. The change in direction of the foundation from being a mixture of players to building a foundation solely based on under 23s, it really just comes with the territory of not being in Europe. The squad was anchored with high wages and underperforming senior players. So the rebuttal for that was, let's get under 23 players that would come into Arsenal, even though we're outside of Europe, would inevitably not and want big wages, and then we could kind of just like balance everything out. So for me, the idea of the foundation, and we started last season, doesn't really sit well with me, because I don't necessarily feel like what we did last season is similar or in line with what we're doing now. It seems like a complete change in direction based on our inability to qualify for Europe and not meeting our benchmarks. It makes a huge difference for Arsenal Football Club to be in Europe or not. And I think we struggled in this summer window to convince better players of a better quality to come into Arsenal without Europe. So then we end up with 6 under 23s that are highly talented, and then some others that we don't really know about. So for me, I'm not sure we've really built this foundation. It's very inconclusive for me. You have, like I said, the inconclusive kind of levels of young talent that we have. I think we know like Odegaard, highly talented, maybe Lokonga as well. But you have the Tomiyasus and the Tavareshes and maybe even Ramsdale, who we're not quite sure what their level actually is. And then you add that with the inconsistency of Granit Xhaka, Leno, Thomas, because of his availability, and the amount of very mediocre squad players that we have that we end up having to rely upon. For me, that's not a strong foundation. Elliot Smith from the Arsenal Vision podcast, when they did their reaction to the interview, said, and I thought that this was really key, is a foundation is sturdy. A foundation is something you can rely upon and build off of. And I don't necessarily feel the combination of these players really says foundation to me now. Maybe it does in the next couple of years, but because we don't really know what these players are going to end up being, I think foundation should be used a little bit loosely. The ceiling of this team for me is still between 6th place and 10th. And so when your foundation, leaves you at 10th, I don't really think that that's sturdy, is it? See what you guys are saying. So a super chat here from Mark Arthur C. Phillips. Thank you so much for your super chat. Let me go back up. Mark says, I hate this youth project. We are not Ajax, and we have a far better setup in order to run a youth project. Ours is in chaos. Yeah. And a lot of people don't like to hear the word youth project because it feels like we're not doing anything for now. And I don't think we're doing anything for now. I think everything is it's a kind of just like a shot, into the wind, hoping that these players turn out to be something, and what we have built for this particular season, which is what most people are really worried about, is the now, is not something that you can really say. You can say, okay, well, yeah, I like that. I don't really think, the combination of those senior players, those mediocre kind of in between players, and then the younger players, it doesn't really say we're trying to get anything done. And we do know that one of the bigger quotes that kind of came out of all of this, the interview, is Edu'S reluctancy to tell fans what their targets were for this season. I don't think there's no targets. I just don't think they feel comfortable telling us what the targets are, because it could be a matter of our target is 8th through 10th. No fan wants to hear that because we just finished in 8th 2 seasons in a row. Now, if you say your target is 6th and we end up finishing 8th, then you still get slandered. So I don't necessarily feel like him saying that there's no targets or whatever means that we don't actually have them. But you can kind of see that they feel like they're under stress. And that doesn't really give you a lot of confidence in this foundation that he's built, because he said that he was confident in the team for now and for the future, which is something else that I pulled out of that interview. And not saying what your target is when you're really confident in what you built for now and the future just says to me that you're not actually confident, and you're really reluctant to say things because you know the fans are on your ass, which is really what it is, right? We're on their ass. They're afraid to say anything because they told us to judge at the end of the window, which to me just says they're on Twitter seeing what the reaction to the signings are, Jamal says, "Hi Jess, I've been mad busy lately. I haven't been able to catch you live, sorry. Watch back on playback. Thankful to catch a live stream. Do excuses." That's what it kind of feels like. It feels like you don't really have to do this if you're doing all the right things. Having to come out 2 seasons in a row and explain the window to the fans just lets you know kind of where we are, So let's keep going. He said, "We believe in the squad now, and we believe it will be even stronger in the future." And that's kind of what I was going into, is that what they're doing in the media and putting out fires in the media, doing interviews and stuff like that, doesn't really say confident to me at all. Did Thomas Partey, Willian, Aubameyang, these players, did they sign up for this youth project? I've been doing a lot of thinking on this in the last couple of days, and the idea that the idea that last season and this season's windows are connected in any way doesn't sit with me. I think this is a clear pivot based on what we've done. Thomas Partey, for me, is not a player that has won the Champions League, was on a really good team, of Atletico, doesn't come to Arsenal for a youth project in his prime. That stinks. That's not what it is. Aubameyang doesn't re-sign for Arsenal, and we know that he was given assurances in that summer when he signed his new contract that certain types of players were going to come in. Do you think that he thought that those players would be Tavares, Lokonga, Ramsdale? No, I don't think so. I think he thought the level of players that were going to come in were going to be able to facilitate him to go forward in his career, and for him to be a part of an Arsenal team that's successful. Because let's just be real, since he's been at Arsenal, he hasn't been on a successful Arsenal team. William, a dude talked about it in his interview, was uncomfortable. He was not comfortable. What does that mean? He, and Kia said it as well, that he came in for one thing and that didn't come to fruition. The project that he signed up for last summer is not the project that is being put together now. Halfway through the season, Arteta, I think for the betterment of our season, benched a lot of the senior players and moved forward with youth. And from that moment on, we have pivoted solely to the youth for the success of this football club. And that's not what Willian has signed up for. I also want to go back to David Luiz's quote. Let me just pull it up here. We're going to talk about that later, you guys. That's not actually what I want to put together. But this is what David Luiz basically said. He said, this is what he said in the mail when he left. "Both of us decided to split. I came for 2 years and the aim was to win something, which I did, was the FA Cup. Now I think the club has a different project for long term. They have different ideas. My idea is to win as soon as possible. Luiz is still yet to find a new club, la 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 la." So the idea again that this is not a complete pivot based on how we finish the season is just stupid. Like, that's literally what it is, right? So, and I think that's why you're seeing a mass exodus of some more of the senior players, and why they're not really sticking around for this. This is not what they signed up for. And I just feel like they're being a little bit dishonest saying that these two windows are connected when they clearly aren't. So, how do we know that they're on board with this? Can Arteta get them on board? And we'll have a longer conversation towards the end of this stream about if Arteta is the right guy to move this youth project forward. You have Leno, Bellerin, Granit Xhaka, all wanting out this summer. All of them, they wanted out. Leno and Jack are still here, but it's very clear based on what happened this summer that those players wanted to go. Bellerin's willing to pay his way out. Willian is giving up $20 million of money that he's guaranteed through his contract to get out of Dodge, you know? So that doesn't say to me that these players are on board with the youth project. And quite frankly, this youth project doesn't move forward without a small group of senior players that can help these young players move forward and develop and give them the stability, i.e. the foundation, to catapult from. You know, so I have questions about that. So yeah, and you have your Aubameyangs and Lacazettes, who we also know are a little bit flaky. I think Thomas is somebody that is a really good player, but I love him to death, but I don't see him as a leader. And I definitely don't see him as somebody that, beyond being a good template for Sambi, is going to be somebody that he's not a Jordan Henderson. Jordan Henderson is the type of leader that you want in your youth project because he cares enough about the club to give a shit about these young players. These players that we're talking about, the Lenos, the Aubameyangs, the Lacazettes, the Thomas, they're not actually connected to the club enough to give a shit about these young players long term. They care about their prime years right now. You know, so I have questions about whether we have the right group of senior players to help this young group develop into what we expect them to be in the next 2 to 3 seasons. Edu also confirmed that Granit Xhaka and Thomas are the starting midfielders, and this really, really annoyed me. The club has consciously chose a young backup to Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey and created a clear hierarchy instead of competition. I put out a tweet not too long ago about my frustration around the lack of competitiveness in our squad and how I think it's directly correlated to our inability to be a competitive team. I think when you have a group of players that are pushing each other to be better, and there's a group of players that care enough to try to beat the next man for the starting position, you become a better team. Edu said basically that Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey are the starters, and they didn't want to bring in somebody that would create competition for them. They are the starters, and that's it. And I just feel like this is a really dangerous game, and it's in the pattern over the last 6-7 years. None of our best players, none of the players that start, they never have competition for their place. And I think that is directly correlated with us not being competitive. It doesn't make sense. The next man up, Chambers, next man up, Rob Holding, next man up, El Neni, is not good enough for Arsenal Football Club. It's just not. The best teams that we've had with, the next man up was Kanu. Next man up is Wiltord. These guys, Ray Parler. These guys could start for any team. Can El Neni start for any team in the Premier League? Absolutely not. And I'm not saying we have to have world-class quality in every single position and backups. What I'm saying is that we are consciously making our team less competitive, and I don't understand who's making this call. This is a clear mistake for me. Granit Xhaka should have been replaced, or a midfielder should have been brought in regardless to if he stayed or not. We're under massive pressure against Norwich, and our options are to potentially rush Thomas Partey back in or play Ainsley Maitland-Niles because El Neni is injured to my knowledge, and Granit Xhaka, who you decided to keep because he's a leader, got a red card when we're under pressure against City. So the idea that we should be giving Granit Xhaka comes straight back into the team after this and doesn't have to worry about his position. That irritates the crap out of me. We are not competitive, and I'm not saying that you have to bring in a world-class player, but somebody who can immediately step in and put pressure on the back heels of these guys will light a fire under their ass and make them play for this football club. The idea that this is okay makes no sense to me, and I don't care if we're not in Europe or not. We should have competition for places. Why? Because we're Arsenal Football Club, and that's what competitive clubs do. So that really irritated me. I cannot lie. It just sums up everything that's wrong with this football club. We have decided, if Xhaka doesn't go, we're not going to add anybody else to the squad that could potentially take his spot. I love Sambi. But I was never under the illusion that at some point in this season, it would be Granit Xhaka on the bench and Thomas Partey and Lokonga starting in that midfield. They actually brought competition for Thomas more than they did for Granit. And I'm sorry, but Thomas doesn't need competition for his place. Granit Xhaka freaking does. So that for me makes absolutely no sense and irritates the crap out of me. Like who says that? Like, who actually says that? Oh, these are the starters, and we actually don't want to bring in anybody to compete with them. We just want somebody that's underneath them. Like, that's why you have the El Nenis still sitting around here. He's perfectly fine collecting a check and not pushing for playing time, because quite frankly, he should be in another league because he's never been good enough. It's just silly. Yeah, it's just silly. That was just ridiculous. When he said that, I couldn't get over it. Rixby says, I was okay with Xhaka staying, but not as a starter. And that's the thing is, I've been saying this, and people have been pushing back at me that there would be some sort of rotation. I said from the moment that Xhaka stayed, I said if Xhaka stays, Xhaka starts, because that is the environment that we have created for this football club. If you're a starter, you'll never have competition for your place. Does Aubameyang really have competition for his position? And Balogun and Martinelli? No, he doesn't. Not at all. He really doesn't. Xhaka, competition for his place? No, not really. Bellerin, has he ever had competition for his place? No, not really. You know what I mean? Like Leno, he went through large spells of last season without competition for his place. Is it not a coincidence that his form slides when he doesn't have anybody nipping at his heel? Like, that's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable for me. It just is. The only players that have some competition for their place is the kids. And they're not actually the ones that need it. It's these older players that are just sitting around collecting checks. Sorry. Alex says, Edu was a midfielder and didn't buy a midfielder. I'm done. So was Arteta. Io says, ease off El Neni, Jess. He's a lovable soul. I'm not saying, and that's the thing. It's like, I'm not saying that I don't love El Neni, but I don't really want nice guys around the club. I want people that are, I hate to sound like Jose Mourinho, but we need bastards in our club. We need people that are going to push other people and say, I'm willing to rip the shirt off your back. And for young players, it's hard to do that. It's always easy for Arteta to say, I went for experience, and for people to go, yeah, that makes sense. But if you have Basuma in your team and he decides to start Xhaka and Thomas Partey and we play like shit, and then you could put pressure on him and say, well, why didn't you start Basuma? Or Neves or Bruno Guimaraes, so it's just a joke. The nice guy thing doesn't really pan out for me, does it? Ignatius says, Jess, you don't seem to see the big picture. It's going to take time to revamp the squad, and that's the direction that the team is going. No, I completely understand that, 100%. We're talking about what he said. He said that he believed in the team in the short term and the long term. So we're analyzing what he said. I understand that this is a longer term rebuild, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I have major concerns about whether or not we have the team and the older players, senior players around to make this project make sense. It's okay to ask questions, and it's going to take time. But we're talking soft culture. We're talking about not having competition for places. That's not necessarily saying we need to win right now. But there's clear holes in this whole. This was the plan from the beginning, and these are the right players to help this young team develop, and that's what we're really talking about here, is not that it's a long-term project or not. I definitely see the big picture here. Oyatolani says, Laka is competition for Abba. Is he really? They don't play similarly at all. Is Lacazette, somebody who in his best season couldn't even reach 15 goals in the Premier League, really be true competition for Aubameyang? Not in my mind. Is Tammy Abraham competition for Aubameyang? Absolutely, because he's a young, hungry player. Lacazette is happy to sit on his contract and leave Arsenal for free. So for me, that's not really competition for places at all, to be honest. So yeah, you guys, let's move forward. Let's move forward a little bit more. He also talk about Ramsdale being short-term and long-term, and I think that this was an important point to make because I was kind of tired of hearing that we only bought backups. We actually didn't. The only players that we brought in, to my knowledge and from my understanding, that are backup players are Sambi Lokonga and Nuno Tavares. Aaron Ramsdale is going to be the number one goalkeeper for Arsenal Football Club moving forward. So he's serving as a number 2 at the moment, but he will inevitably, probably next season, if not sooner than that, succeed Bernd Leno. So for me, he's not really a backup because he's our long-term goalkeeper. I don't know if Nuno Tavares ever overtakes Kieran Tierney for his position, and I certainly don't think Sambi Lokonga is going to take Thomas Partey's position anytime soon. So I think it's important to understand the Ramsdale situation and apply context to it, regardless to if you like Ramsdale or not. My problem with Ramsdale was always about the amount that we paid and what we could have done with that money. Now that I know that there was never an intention of bringing in another midfielder unless Granit Xhaka left, now I know why they went ahead and spent the money on Ramsdale, because they were always going to spend it on a position that they felt like was more needed than midfield, because clearly Edu and Arteta rate this midfield higher than the majority of the fan base, in my view. So Aaron Ramsdale is somebody that I'm excited to see develop, and I fully expect him to play more games than he's probably, maybe even he thinks he'll play. Bernd Leno is crumbling as we speak, and it doesn't seem like he's invested in the long-term vision either, so we'll definitely see what happens there. But I think it was important to establish the role of Ramsdale as not just a number 2, like a Matty Ryan or a Renarson, but more as somebody that's going to be there for the long term. And I do think it's important that our number 2 goalkeeper is homegrown. We lost that in Emi Martinez, and bringing that back in is important for our homegrown quota. So that, to me, made a lot of sense. I also want to key in on the point of let's judge the team when they play together. And I think that that's more than fair. I do think it's more than fair because we haven't been able to see this group of players together. And that group of players, it's pretty obvious who it is. It's Tierney with Gabriel and White and probably Tomiyasu, Thomas Partey with Xhaka, or Thomas Partey with Lokonga, plus Odegaard with our first choice strikers available and not out due to COVID. But I just wonder how many times during the season, with it being so up and down as I feel like it's going to be, how many times we're going to see this group play together. One of the caveats to last season, or a key part of last season, I think the reason why how do I word this? We only had our key players in like Thomas Partey, Tierney, Odegaard, and like Saka together on the pitch together like 4 times last season. And when we had them in the team together, our underlying metrics were so much better. And so I think I'm hoping that we've addressed enough of the holes in the squad so that if we are missing key players, it's not something where it's like we lose the game if we don't have these 4 players out on the pitch at the same time together. You know what I mean? So I think it's definitely fair with the events that have taken place at the beginning of the season to say, just wait until we see these players together, But barring any late injuries, which can always happen at Arsenal Football Club, but barring any late injuries, at the weekend, we'll have Odegaard, ESR, Bukayo Saka, Aubameyang, Lacazette, Sambi, maybe Thomas, Gabriel, Tommy, Tierney, and White. It's damn near your best team. So we'll get to see quite soon if it's a matter of judging the team when they play together or if there's bigger issues here, which I don't think it's going to be as simple as put all these guys out there on the pitch and we just start to click. But we'll definitely see what happens, but I do think that's definitely fair from Edu to say, let's judge the team when they play together. Let's see. Nashville Gooner says, it's really not fair because we are a football club. We are a football club and not a starting 11. Hey, it's one of those where that is an excuse until it's not, and I'm willing to allow that to be something that that little bit of context that you can add. But that's going to run out. That's going to run out. And bringing in Lakanga and Sambi has to mean that when Tierney and Thomas are not out, that we still have similar results. And I don't think we necessarily will, because I do think these players are quite raw. Lakanga is further along in his development, but Tavares to me is not a dead-on replacement for Tierney, if that makes sense. So I do think there'll be some fallout there, but we'll definitely see what happens with these players. I do understand that they have to gel and all of that, but I do expect better performances, a style of play to be recognizable, and just honestly, I expect us to beat Norwich, regardless if they've actually played so many matches together. I mean, the majority of this team has actually played together, except for Tomiyasu and White, if we're really, really honest, so we shouldn't really expect anything but growth, and not, for us to relapse and go backwards. Let's see. Blaze says, "Hi Jessica, how are you doing?" I'm doing great. Blaze says, "I think Arsenal tried to build a young team like the team in season 2007-2008 with Fabregas Club, Rosicky, Walcott, and Adebayor." And we have had Project Youth several times in the last 15 years. They never really come to fruition because we never finish the project quick enough before key players want to go. And that's definitely something that we have to think about. I think about Bukayo Saka spending so much time with the English national team, and how at some point they will get in his ear and say, what, you really could play for City. You should leave that dead project behind. So these projects, they look good and they sound good on paper, but the execution of them are quite difficult, because in the end of the day, you still have to improve. And when bumps in the road happen, which they inevitably will, how can you adjust? And in the past, we've just had too many injuries, and players that were key to the success of the project leave too early. And I fear that the same thing may happen. But again, let's see what happens. Io says, "Arteta tax is proving completely draining on the emotional coffers." You guys are talking to each other. Rixby says, "When we had Project Youth before, we had Wenger, who we trusted and get the best out of these youngsters." And that is definitely something we will come up to at the end of the show, because there are things about Project Youth that's more than just having talented young players. You have to have the structure around it to allow it to work. So we'll definitely see. And Tawanda, I appreciate that Saka is loyal, but what gives you the indication that he's loyal? Is it just because he's a Hale End kid? He wouldn't be the first kid that was in Hale End or was at Arsenal from a very young age that left because we weren't competitive. But Kyle Saka is on an upward trajectory of a kid that I haven't seen in a very long time at Arsenal. And so he will be in circles with players that will say, leave this behind if, it's not moving forward. So the idea that Bukayo Saka would never leave because he's loyal to Hale End, I think is a little bit presumptuous and a little bit like we're projecting based on what we really want. We don't know what Bukayo Saka will do. I think there's a very real possibility that if the project does not progress at a rate that's up to his standard, he would be tempted to go. I don't think there's a lot of Jack Grealishes that will stay that long at a club despite, being so great. You know what I mean? I think that players are a lot more likely to move around quicker because careers are short, so I appreciate that. And I hope that Saka is loyal because I think this project is going to take longer, than maybe we want it to. But would I be surprised if in 2 seasons or so he's ready to go to Man City? Absolutely not, especially if things aren't going the way that we expect them to go. Edu also said we need to look at the big picture and see multiple windows. And I do understand that, especially during the pandemic, it's going to take a lot longer to turn over the squad than we probably would like. Last window, we missed out on getting a creative midfielder. We had to bring Odegaard in, and bam, things started to kind of work after that. We know Willian was a failure, but everything else in that window, I think, is okay. We have to see how Thomas Partey gets on. His injuries have been damaging, but hopefully he can stay fit. Gabriel is a good pickup. So last window was a decent start for me of a different project that has changed. Now this window, he said that he wanted to consolidate and get a better foundation. We've already spoken about the foundation not really being a sturdy foundation. It's an idea, but it's not really what he's making it seem like because of all the inconclusive aspects of that foundation. That being, how good are these young players? Are these senior players actually committed to the project, and the mediocre players that they're playing with and that we have to rely upon because they're in the team? So the foundation we've already talked about, but consolidating, we have done that. We have consolidated and brought down the wage bill considerably, and we've gotten rid of dead wood, albeit we haven't been able to recruit much, but I do understand that the players that we've gotten rid of are very tough to move on the contracts that they're on, and quite frankly, they're not great players anyway, and we were in the middle of a pandemic. So that is something that, although I feel that we had opportunities to move players on and we decided to keep them longer to get their value up overall, even though the outgoings are underwhelming, I can understand why it's difficult to move players on, but we have consolidated. So foundation, I don't think that that's really making any sense. Consolidation, we have done that. And he also said it's impossible to buy just 1 to 2 players because we needed to balance the team. Basically, that's alluding to the amount of holes that we had to address. Right back, right-sided center back, backup goalkeeper, all of that. Now, my pushback on this is that there was a way to still address some of the holes in the squad, pay less for certain positions, and be able to address central midfield as well. And we chose not to do that. Now, I understand that it's because Xhaka is a starter. Once you bring him in, you don't bring in a midfielder. But the idea that we couldn't have allocated the funds better doesn't wash with me, especially when you spend $50 million on Ben White and $25 million on Ramsdale. And also, I just want to ask you guys this. Would you have preferred to bring in 1 or 2 players of a higher quality versus addressing the 6 positions that we did? Like, for instance, if we had just brought in Odegaard, or let's not say Odegaard. Let's make it even better, because let's say we're not getting anything else. Let's say we get a backup goalkeeper. Backup goalkeeper is some guy on loan, Ben Foster, whatever that guy's name is, right? Let's say we just brought in Basuma and Madison versus everything else that we did, meaning we don't have Tavares, we don't have Lakanga, we have to play some combination of Saliba/Rob Holding, we have to play some combination of Cedric, Chambers, or whatever at right back. But what we did do was we have a Madison-like creative midfielder in our team plus Basuma. How would you guys feel about that? Would you have preferred the 1 to 2 players to come in and us have to deal with the rest? Or do you like the aspect of us bringing in 6 players and covering more holes? Let me know in the chat box what you think. Let's see what you guys think. Yeah, you guys let me know in the chat box. Reload says they could have filled the exact same position, spent the exact same money, and got way more out of it. Tawanda says we would have struggled if we just got 2 players in. Edward says the strategy and signings we made this transfer season make complete sense to me. In my opinion, last season with European soccer, football, was the time to spend big on more experienced star players. Okay. Alex says Tammy, Madison, and Basuma would have transformed the starting 11. I mean, because I didn't even add Tammy in there because I know we wouldn't have been able to sell Lacazette, but you could have brought in those 3 players, and you know, basically at that point, you just would have had to figure out what you're going to do between Saliba and Rob Holding. You would have had to bring in a really, really cheap backup goalkeeper, but you would not have backups for, in particular, Kieran Tierney. You probably could have made do with some combination of El Neni and maybe even Aziz. But when you look at that and you see Tammy, Madison, and Basuma, you don't even have to say Madison, you could say Tammy, Odegaard, and Basuma. You look at that and that transforms, your starting 11, and seeing the starting 11 that we have and not really knowing how much better we've gotten. It's interesting to see how people would feel if we had just brought in two players, 1 to 2 players instead, that really moved the needle in our first 11. Let's see. Bobby says, Onana, Aarons, Awar, Basuma, Lautaro Martinez with Saliba and Guendouzi still here would have been my summer window. I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, you guys, we're not relitigating whether or not we like Madison or not, but let's just say we bring in a better quality creative midfielder, whoever that looks like to you. That could have been Buendia, that could be Odegaard, whatever. Odegaard plus a Basuma plus maybe a Tammy, and that's it. Would that have made a difference to you? But instead of addressing more holes, but not really being sure about the talent level that we also actually brought in. Davion says Basuma and Madison, then get Lokanga, Tavares, Tomiyasu, and have Saliba. I mean, the suggestions that are going around in the chat, although I do feel like we're not behind the scenes, so how do we know? I do think there were other ways to use these funds. So when he says we couldn't have just brought in 1 or 2 players, well, I understand that, but could we have not addressed the starting 11 and still get the wage bill and the age down? And address that starting 11 and still address maybe 1 or 2 more positions, backup goalkeeper and Tavares. There were other things that we could have done. This wasn't what we had to do. This is what we chose to do. Nashville Gunner says White was a much needed signing. Our build-up was terrible without Luiz. He needed replacing. Yeah, I agree with that. Could Saliba have not stepped in there though? Let me know. Rick Speed says, if we signed Madison, would we have trust in Arteta to get the best out of him? I don't know. That's up to you guys. I'm pretty down on Arteta at the moment, so I'm having a hard time seeing how he develops this young team, and also gets these older players on side, gets a style of play together, and gets results from 20th. But that's just me. Yeah. Yo-Yo says, let's not assume these quality players want to join Arsenal. Awar priced himself out last summer. That is a really good point that Edu did say that he spoke to several players, and this may have been your Locatelli's, Lautaro Martinez, Awars, and they didn't have the greatest response to being linked to Arsenal or wanting to come to Arsenal, and they essentially went for players that were jumping at the chance to come. So that is a really, really good point that maybe the players that we really wanted didn't really want to come to Arsenal, and we'll never really know if they did or not, right? But that's a really, really good point, Yo-Yo. So, and yeah, so where was I? So essentially, is the team more balanced and consistent because of Lokanga and Tavares, because we spread it a little bit, we spread it more thin, but we were able to cover more positions? It really depends. I think it will know more when the season goes a little bit further and we're able to see these players play in the Premier League. I think it's inconclusive. I definitely don't think Tierney and Thomas are similar to Lokanga and Tavares in terms of levels. But I do think we have filled those gaps, and there's at least somebody to step in, and we don't have to weaken another position in order to address that one. So I do think that will make us a little bit more consistent. Do I still anticipate drop-off? Absolutely, because Tierney and Thomas are great players. They are top players, and Lokanga and Tavares are not. So there are already rumors circulating about a central midfielder and a striker being the next positions that we will address, which is pretty freaking obvious if you really think about it. Not able to get rid of Lacazette. He'll walk away for free next summer, so we will have to address the center forward position. I wouldn't be surprised if even Aubameyang left, but at that point, if he's still in good form, I'd prefer to keep him and have a rotating option with a new, exciting, younger, but not super young like what we have, but a newer, younger striker. And then you have your central midfielder that will come in when we please sell Granit Xhaka. So that starting lineup could potentially look something, like this. Let me show it to you guys. So that starting lineup, so let's say in 2022, 2023, if we get through this season, we're able to keep all of our players and they're one season more experienced, they're one season better, and this could be potentially what we're looking at if we were to address the center forward position and midfield next summer. Now these names could be different. It may not be Alexander Isak. It may be a Dominic Calvert-Lewin. It may not be Bissouma. It may be a Neves. That's not really what we're debating. But can you see the struggle of this season being worth it if this is the team that we're looking at, not this season, but the season after, kind of building this foundation that Edu has talked about with the players that he brought in now? You guys let me know in the chat box what you think. And no, we're not saying, it's not about do you like Isak and all of that, but imagine the striker that you want coming in. Imagine the center midfielder that you want to come in realistically. And is this a team that you can get behind? If you want Pepe in there instead of Smith Rowe, you can have Pepe in there instead of Smith Rowe. It's fine. Let's see. Reload says they could have got that team as good as that this season. Let's see. Yes Man says Milan done similar business, position and age profile to us, but I feel they got far more for their money than we did. Tomori, Magnon, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say that goalkeeper's name. Adley and Balotore for less than the cost of Ben White and Ramsdale. I understand that. Let's see. Oya Talani says, this is the plan they have, or at least claim to have, from where we are today. We do not need more than 2 big signings. And that's basically what he's saying. The idea, though, is that, you know, we have to look at, there's an important point in here that Reload says the next year Saka has 2 years left. We don't know if he'll be gone or not, but we have to remember that we still have to be competitive enough and look like we know what we're doing enough. And Arteta would have to improve enough as a manager to keep these players here. That's still just as important in this project, is that a part of the project is Arteta becoming this generational manager that we were pitched when he came in. You know, so that's a little bit of my apprehension about all of this, is that although I see this vision and this vision makes me happy and I'm like, oh yeah, that looks really good. We've gotten the wage bill down. We have this young and exciting team. The key component to this is not just the players. It's about Arteta. Is he good enough to manage these players? He has to be able to keep these older players, the Thomases and the Aubameyangs in particular, on side. He has to be able to develop and keep the young players on side, and he has to be able to put in a style of play that's recognizable and good enough to get results from the players that we have now. So that's a lot of responsibility and requirements for a manager who, in my opinion, has not shown the ability to do that. Can he get there? I don't know. You know, I look at this team and I think, wow, that's really exciting and that's something that I'd like to see. But I'm not sure that I agree that Arteta is the guy to bring this project forward. He has to improve as well. It's not just get me better players and I'll become a better manager. He has gotten better players, but he hasn't really been able to get a grip on them enough to see sustained results over a long period of time. Yes, he did towards the back end of last season, but if we're honest, it was after he had really kind of capitulated in the Europa League. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my reaction to everything that Edu'S said in that press conference. I also thought it was, not press conference, in that interview. I also think it was interesting, you know, that The Athletic had kind of come out and said that all of this is the concoction of Edu'S, which pretty much deads the idea that he's going to go anywhere. Tomiyasu, Ramsdale, and White were Arteta signings. He basically pushed for those, and Tavares and Lokanga are Edu signings. There are questions for me about whether these players are too specific for Arteta's system. But I do think that whatever manager comes in after Arteta, if he is sacked, will be able to take this group of players and get something out of them. I think that that's more of an Arteta issue, looking at these players, and because they're not specific enough to his system, he can't get anything out of them. I think a more experienced manager could take this group and figure something out with it. So I'm not overly concerned. But let's see what you guys are saying. Tawanda says Graham Potter would do bits. He keeps on improving as a manager. Exactly. And that's a key part of it, is we keep talking about the players, and I'm like, is it really the players, or does Arteta need to become a better manager? And I don't like that he's he's the main part of this project. I'm more concerned about the players, and I would prefer a manager that knows what he's doing to come in and take this project by the scruff of the neck. Because again, do you believe that Aubameyang is onside? Do you believe that Thomas Partey is onside? We know Leno's not, and we know Granit Xhaka is not. So if you don't have the buy-in from the senior players that are going to allow you to let this project go forward, then what are we even doing here? You know, it's really inconclusive for me. Davion says, we don't have any technical guile mentality in midfield to get Aubameyang going forward. Yeah, there are issues in the midfield. I think we do lack some technical quality, but we also lack the ability to compete because we can't run. And that is a direct effect of having Granit Xhaka as a pillar in your midfield, which is what we've signed up for the next 2 to 3 seasons. So yeah, our midfield is not good enough to allow our front players to cook. You know, our front players are not that bad, but they just don't get enough clear-cut chances. They're not put in positions that are best for them, and so they're suffering. Aubameyang is a really good example of that. So yeah, I think the midfield is a big part of that, but the club decided that Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka is a midfield too, with Odegaard in front of them, and is a good enough midfield for the present. So they have to live and die by their choices, honestly. Nashville Gunnar says, bring in Ragnick to replace Edu and let him bring in the manager who can execute his vision. That is how it's supposed to work, but it's working. It's more convoluted and unclear the way that we're doing things. Arteta should not be able to strong arm the board into taking or to bringing in Ramsdale, White, and Tomiyasu. The director of football should say what, you know, at the very, at the most collaborative, because ideally I'd prefer the director of football to create the vision and hire a manager that can get it to be executed on the pitch from the players. But let's say in the most collaborative environment in terms of a director of football and a manager's relationship, I would prefer the director of football to say, what profiles do you need for your system? Arteta come back and say, I need an inverted right back, a good ball playing center back, and a goalkeeper that's young and English. And I would prefer him to go out and find the profiles that still allow us to function in the market and improve more instead, because Arteta basically chose the most important, the most expensive signings of the summer besides Odegaard. And I just feel like that's a little bit risky when you think about the fact that, and I'm not saying that this is the 100% right thing to do, but you could have brought in another goalkeeper, just any old guy with 2 hands. You could have kept Saliba. The director of football could have said, you need to figure out what you're going to do with Saliba, play him, and use that 50 million, that 75 plus to bring in 2 really outstanding players that move the mark. You know, so ideally, that's the relationship that they should have, but I don't view Edu and Arteta's relationship that way. I think when Arteta's not getting his way, he's able to strong-arm his way through things, and that's not really how it should go, in my view. Let's see. Ignatius says, I didn't think you would say Arteta capitulated in Europa League. He lost in the semifinal. Man U and Chelsea with better players could not beat Villarreal in 90 minutes. I mean, we can't just say that because Man United didn't beat Villarreal in the final that we could not have beaten whoever in the final. Like, he did capitulate. He chose a really silly lineup in the first leg against Villarreal. Emile Smith-Rowe was played as a false 9 in that series. Like, he did capitulate in the Europa League. Like, I stand by that. If you have a different opinion, that's perfectly fine. But the idea that just because Man United couldn't beat Villarreal means that it's okay for us not to be able to beat them when there was clear tactical mistakes that were made. He did capitulate in the Europa League. I don't see it any differently from that. But, I respect your opinion if it's different than mine. Oyatalani says, the Saliba thing angers me a lot. That guy is a top player. I don't think Saliba was ready, to start every single match for Arsenal Football Club, mostly because the person that was going to be sitting next to him, was going to be playing next to him, would also be young and probably needs a leader. But I do think he could have been in the squad. And Ben White has to be really good, doesn't he? It has to work out. It has to, but yeah, it just has to work out, because every single time that Ben White makes a bad pass, every single time that Ben White misses a header, every single time Ben White doesn't look like the $50 million acquisition, it'll always go back to, wow, look at Saliba. And I'm not surprised that he's doing well in France. He's in a comfortable environment, playing with a good coach that knows what he's doing, with friends and all of that. Of course he's doing well. He's a good player. We just have to live with it at this point, because I don't think he's coming back. If I'm 100% honest, I don't see him coming back. By the time he comes back, he'll have 2 years left on his deal. And do you think, unless the manager changes, I don't think Saliba's coming back into this team. Io says, Arteta attempting a false 9. Defo had Pep on FaceTime the night before. I mean, in my view, he capitulated in the Europa League, and that's just is what it is. He's the one who chose to play Xhaka at left back, because Cedric made a mistake in the leg prior. Like, there's just, for me, when I look back at the Europa League, I see Arteta written all over it. Now, the season, there were multiple reasons why Arteta was being one of them, why we did not perform well in the league. I don't blame him 100% for that. But when it comes to Europa League, a lot of it comes down to the in-game decisions of the manager right then, and it's a high-pressure moment, and I think he bottled it. I really, really do. You should be able to beat Villarreal with the team that we have. Like, sorry. Let's see. Eunice says, in a rebuilding process, you must have short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets. So what is theirs? I mean, Edu neglected to, he was reluctant to tell the interviewer what the targets were. He made it seem like there weren't any, but I think internally they obviously should. If they don't, then we're in a lot of trouble. But I don't expect him to tell the fans, because let's just be real, like, that's just going to add more pressure on them, and they don't want more pressure. They're under a lot of pressure as it is, so, we don't know what they are. But I think it was last season, Arteta's goals, or his targets, were a respectable position in the league, no actual number, but respectable, so that's subjective. Europa League, I think, qualification. Going far in Europa League and instituting a style of play and changing the culture. And those were his only parameters, like via the Athletic, were respectable position in the league, go far in the Europa League, change the culture. And I don't know if I necessarily see a clear culture change at the moment. He went far in the Europa League but bottled, and then respectable is subjective, because for me, eighth 2 years in a season, 2 years in a row is not respectable. But hey, maybe it is for Arteta. Let's see. Dave Riley says, we shall see on Saturday against Norwich if the team has any fight. Yeah, exactly, 100%. And that's why, as honest as I want to be about Arteta and how I feel about what's going on, everything potentially could change against Norwich. I'm not as optimistic about it, but if it does, I prefer that than the alternative of having to go in with another manager and start over and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I prefer Arteta just get his shit together and the team get their shit together. But I think I saw more in that match against Man City that lean more towards him losing players than us just not having our best players. Like, you know? Let's see. Tawanda says, Arsenal need to have their own unique transfer policy like before when they found gems like Carzola and Monreal. I mean, yeah, I don't know what the transfer policy is. It's changed, so many times based on who's in charge. But I would like to see a consistent transfer policy. I don't know if we'll ever see it under Edu and Arteta because they're flapping at the moment. Okay, you guys, I want to stay on for like another 10 minutes or so. Do you guys want to do Q&A? You guys can drop your questions in the chat box. Just make sure it's obvious what it is or that it's a question. Just put a Q in front of it or something so I know. I thought somebody had a question about manager and questions about DOFs. What do I think about them? So just go ahead and drop them in the chat box. Ben Ross says, Villarreal have a much better team and manager. I disagree with you a bit on the tactic, but his tactics were disgraceful. Yes. Is Villarreal that much better? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we have been told to believe that this team is really, really bad. And I don't think they necessarily are. But agree to disagree on that one, but the tactics were terrible. So you didn't even give yourself a chance to win. Nashville Gooner says, he did bring in Tobin Heath, a former Ridge Red Devil. I love Tobin Heath, you guys. I really do. She's my favorite U.S. women's national team player. And it's not even close. Abdul Latif says, Pepe to start on Saturday. Let's see. Unless they want to give Saka a rest, I don't know. It depends. It really does. I mean, do you guys think Pepe should start on Saturday or do you think ESR? I'm starting to lose my faith just a little bit in this whole ESR playing off of the left and Odegaard playing through the middle and that making a lot of sense because I don't see goals in that team when you have Saka and just Aubameyang. So, do I think Pepe will start? I don't. If I have to, I don't know, you guys. I don't really know. Would I want him to start? I don't know. I think Arteta picks ESR. But in order to get goals, you might need Pepe. But is he really a sure thing for goals? I just think he's a better option than ESR for goals. So it's a weird one. It's a weird one for me. I'm not sure. Lord Gunnar says, do you believe Arteta has too much power ever since he got promoted after the FA Cup win? Feels like he's undermining Edu? Yes. In my view, because Arteta is a brand new manager who needs to be focusing in on coaching the team, implementing a style of play, getting the most out of the players that he has, making sure his players are on side. The last thing I think he needs to be worried about is transfers and telling Edu, no, I don't want Neto. I want a 25 million Ramsdale. I don't want to play Saliba. I'd rather have 50 million Ben White. I don't think he needs all that. I think he needs to focus. It's like when you start a new job, you kind of need to be eased in and get really good at one thing, and then they'll add something else onto your plate. The FA Cup gave, I think, the fan base and maybe even the club, which is really scary, an unrealistic picture of where Arsenal really was. Cup competitions are tricky. Anybody can win a cup competition, really. And it was not indicative of who we are as a team in the league. We are a mid-table team in the league, maybe not based on just the players that we have, but based on circumstances, Arteta tax, all those types of stuff. We are mid-table. And they gave him responsibility like he was Julian Nagelsmann, somebody who has proved himself to be a good developer of young talent, had good footballing knowledge, tactics, all that kind of stuff, and able to take a team like Leipzig and make them into a top 1 to 3 team in the Bundesliga, or top 2 to 4, because Bayern Munich is the best. They gave him that type of responsibility and that type of clout off of an FA Cup win. And I think the fans, it's okay for the fans to think that way, but not the club. And that just shows how naive the club is. Bakuda asks, would you pick Ramsdale? Would you pick Ramsdale should start on Saturday? Pepe should definitely start. He's the only one that looks like he can score. I would start Ramsdale on Saturday. I think there was like a report that came out that Ramsdale had kind of told his friends, I don't know how true this is, but Ramsdale told his friends that he expects to be involved against Norwich or Norwich or whatever. So I would start him. I really would. I don't think Arteta will, but I would. Mr. SNLO says, how many games would you give Arteta to show his worth? I mean, if I'm being like, I'm thinking about it and it's not based on what I already think and I have not concluded on how I feel about it, I would give him up until, let's look at the schedule really quick. I mean, at least October, I guess. Yeah. So Norwich, Burnley, Wimbledon, Tottenham, Brighton, Crystal Palace, Aston Villa, and Leicester. So let's say we don't win either of the games against Norwich and Burnley. I'd sack them after that and get somebody in for that third round thing against Wimbledon. Let them go in against Tottenham. But I would say we should know what we're looking like by the time we get to Leicester, because we will have played Norwich, another promotion side, Burnley, a team that we should be beating but will give us a hard time away from home, Tottenham, a good team that we should be competitive against still, Brighton, a team that we should be beating, Crystal Palace, a team that we should be beating, Aston Villa, a team that we should be competitive against if not beating, and Leicester, a team that we should be competitive against. And that would leave us into October 30th, and that would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. So that would be exactly 10 games. Now, is that too late? I don't know. It depends. And that's why I feel like it depends on, like, you get more games as you win more games, if that makes sense. It's not lose all the games and then we wait until Leicester. No. Because we need another manager in before that. But that's how long I would probably wait, is to give him the 10 games, and that's if he's winning games in the meantime. Ify says, who's your favorite to replace the rookie? The more I think about it, I'm like, and I've been talking to Io about this, he's in the chat, I think, that at first I was like, maybe Potter. But I feel like this group, because my biggest fear is that Arteta doesn't have the clout to get key players involved, like Thomas Partey and Aubameyang in particular. And I think in this season and next season, we have to have those two players on side because they're going to be important for us. And so I want somebody who will make those two players not only feel like we mean business, but they need to get their shit together. And so I would say somebody like a Luis Enrique, maybe a Conte, even though I'm a little iffy on it just because I think he's pushing for it, but Arsenal may not be so sold on him. It has to be somebody of those levels, and those managers are not available. You could bring in somebody like a Ten Hag, but is he going to leave Ajax mid-season? If you bring in Ten Hag, you bring in Overmars as well. I think you do that move and you just bin both of them. But it's difficult because we've waited until we've gotten in mid-season. We'll be mid-season and we'll be looking for something. But yeah, I just think we have to go for the best. We have to go for the best. Somebody that says we're going after top level. And I just don't think that Potter says that. I think Potter is good for the young players, but not for the players that we need on side, like Thomas Partey and Aubameyang. And they're important to this team as long as they're here. You know what I mean? So yeah, Luis Enrique, Conte, even though I'm like a little like, I would like a Ten Hag. I just don't know, if he would leave Ajax mid-season. Those would be my main choices. They would need to pull somebody out of their current job. The one thing about Luis Enrique is you won't be able to get him until after the World Cup. So that's something you have to think about as well. It's going to be difficult. Lord Gunnar says, Ralph Hasenhüttl is a manager that will whip this team into finish top 4. I don't like him. It's something about he cried after he beat Klopp, and then after that they went on some sick losing streak. And I don't like him. I don't want him. I don't want him anywhere near. Abdul RJ says, is Luis Enrique willing to quit Spain national team for Arsenal FC? I don't know, but money talks, and if you could pay him what he's worth, he may leave, and may come to us, so I think we say they won't come almost maybe like to make us feel better about it. But if the club really wants a top level manager, they will come if they show that they're about business. Like if they show that they're about some bullshit, they won't come, so I think the Hasenhüttls and the Potters would get more out of the group that we have. They would definitely command respect from the younger players, and I do think we instantly play a brand of football that's recognizable, in particular Potter, because he would play attacking football. But again, does that get your Thomas Parties and your Aubameyangs on side? I don't think it does. And does it keep your Sakas around? I don't know, because this guy, he's pushing, so I think you need to bring in somebody with some clout, and the only one that's really available at the moment is Conte, and I'm feeling a little bit weird about him. Nashville Gunnar says Ralph Ragnick. Ralph Ragnick has just taken a new position somewhere, so I don't know if you can get him out of a job that he literally just started this coming season. Jesse Marsch just started at Leipzig, so I'm not really sure that we could take them out of their position because they literally just got there. But I do like both, to be honest. Yeah, you guys, so that's my reaction to Edu'S 2 interviews. And I mean, I am getting excited for the game at the weekend, but at the same time, I'm still kind of like, oh, but what if they play crap? So we'll see. This international break has come at the perfect possible time because there was just so much going on and so much negativity, and I was very much so drowning in it. I'm still not high on anything. I need to see results at this point. That's kind of where I'm at. But, always going to back my team and want them to win no matter what. So hopefully they win against Norwich. But before we get to Norwich, tomorrow for members, it'll be Tomiyasu Tuesday. We'll go through a scouting report on him, talk about what formations he would be best in. Do we think we're moving to a 3-4-3? And just have a nice light conversation about him. That's for members. Consider joining as a member. And then match preview on Thursday, sorry. And then we'll be doing our instant reactions and game day stuff from on Saturday. So thank you guys so much. There's 112 of you guys watching right now. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Share with a friend. Consider becoming a member. Get in that comment section. All that great and wonderful stuff. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.